Page 235 continued. Ritual suzerainty and the Chola kingdom. In a segmentary state, the core area has a central kingship and the peripheral areas have many rulers. Page 64. This means that each ruler will have his rituals, but numerous gods and sects in early medieval times were not united by homogeneous rituals invented by the central kingship, but by the priests who were granted land in both the central and marginal areas. It would be wrong to think that the rituals performed by the various small landed magnates were ordained by the Chola sovereign. Many micro-level elements which they contain would not be found in the central rituals of the Cholas. On the other hand, local rituals may have been founded on the central model. The migration of the Brahmanas in early medieval times introduced an element of uniformity in ritual observances at the regional, sub-regional and local levels. Para. The influence of the temples and the Brahmanas in the Chola kingdom did not vary much from the core to the periphery. The original fourfold Varna system existed only as a model in South India, 26, where only the Brahmanas and the Shudras were the two powerful communities. Page 236. The Brahmanas were mainly landlords and landowners, and the Shudras were mainly peasants. The king defended the power and privileges of the Brahmanas, who naturally upheld his authority. But the Brahmanas were strong enough to defend their position. They even turned into muscle men, 27. It is wrong to think that the relations between peasant villages and the benefices granted to the Brahmanas, known as Brahmadeya grants, remained consistently cordial. The strong ritualistic and ideological propaganda of the Brahmanas, backed by agricultural knowledge and technology they brought to the peasants, may have made them acceptable, but by and large their constant presence in the granted villages and their efforts to collect various kinds of dues strained mutual relations. 28. Inscriptions provide instances of peasant protest against Brahmana domination, not only in Karnataka but also in Tamil Nadu from the 11th to the 13th century. 29. It is wrong to write off the role of the Brahmanas and Brahmadeyas in the distribution of surplus production which was organized by the dominant peasant groups. They undoubtedly collected a good part of the agricultural produce made over to them by the royal land charters and used it not only for their maintenance but also for that of the artisans and the servicing sections attached to them. Of course, the large land-holding temples practiced sub-infeudation by granting pieces of land to the servicing sections of their huge establishment. 30. Segmentary concept and the development of the Chola polity. The segmentary state is viewed in isolation from various modes of production. It is considered to be a form of state which has its own dynamics, page 79. But the dynamics is confined to spatial expansion. If the segmentary state is seen as a state in which political power is diffused in heads of clans or lineages, in which political power is shared by local institutions, or in which many feudal pockets exist, this concept can well be applied not only to Chola and Rajput politics, but also to many other ancient and medieval politics. This is because in ancient and medieval times, page 237, fused states could be called, quote, unitary, unquote, stop. For the post-Gupta period, this is obvious. This seems to have been also true of the Kushana and Satavahana states. 31. But such a characterization does not give us any deeper understanding of the social and economic processes which work in a state. Neither does it tell us about the nature of the class nor about the interest group which dominates the state. States belonging to different points of time may apparently look alike, but such a superficial characterization as quote, segmentary unquote, does not give any inkling of the material foundations and social structures of the various types of state. Polity to be appreciated better has to be taken closer to society and economy. 32. The problem of the class character of the state cannot be bypassed. The quote, segmentary unquote concept does not enable us to distinguish one state or the socio-economic formation of which it is a part from the other state or its socio-economic structure. Para. In spite of his emphasis on segmentation in Chola and Rajput polities, Saudol's comparative method enables him to draw certain basic distinctions between the quote, segmentary state of the Alurs unquote, and the quote, segmentary state of the Cholas unquote stop. He points out that the Alur state was based on the kinship mode of production, and the Chola and the Rajput states were based on the Asiatic mode of production. The material basis of the kinship mode of production is not explained by him. Para. We will take up the problem of the Asiatic mode later. Meanwhile, we may note that the earliest state formation in the Kaveri basin was linked with the advancement in agriculture and urbanism. Ports and towns thrived because of specialized handicrafts, leading to petty commodity production, and they carried on long-distance trade with the Roman Empire in the first 2 centuries of the Christian era. The urban factor may have helped the formation of unitary authority in the Kaveri basin, in which the employees of the state could be paid in cash and its authority could be exercised more effectively. The decline of town coincides with the beginnings of land grants on a large scale. These grants, which became widespread since the 9th century, indicate the legitimate authority of the Chola king to collect taxes from plots of land and peasant villages working on them. Page 238. But at the same time, immunities and privileges attached to the Devadana, Brahmadeya, Agrahara and other grounds clearly show that in addition to the Brahmana Sabhas enjoying local autonomy, eventually there arose many other feudal pockets with fiefs, benefices and sub-infeudation. Saudol wrongly asserts that such pockets did not exist in the Chola kingdom. In fact, temples constituted states within the Chola state. Their religious authority and influence extended well beyond the Chola dominions, but they also enjoyed immense fiscal and administrative authority. Para. From the 11th century onwards, increasing trade and commerce is attested by the appearance of gold and other coins which are mentioned in land sale deeds. The state could therefore have followed a fiscal policy through which it could pay its employees in money and exercise effective control over them. But the real basis of the state income was still the agricultural surplus, which it partly collected from the peasants under its direct control and partly from the various types of beneficiaries it had created. It seems that in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, the collection of surplus by both the state and the intermediaries had become excessive, and this led to a large number of peasant protests articulated in various forms against the state as well as against the Brahmana beneficiaries. 33. Ritualism therefore did not serve the purpose for which it was used. Para. It appears that methods of producing cereals and petty commodities did not remain entirely stagnant from the 1st century AD to the 13th century AD. Similarly, the way the surplus was collected from the peasants and disbursed among others also did not remain unchanged. In early medieval times, we witnessed the rise of a large landed class comprising landholders that mediated between the state and the peasants. Such a class did not exist earlier. In ancient times, we notice unequal distribution of the surplus, but in early medieval times, land which formed the chief means of production and livelihood for the vast mass of the people came to be unequally distributed in a sharp manner in a major part of the country. We can now see changes in the forces of production as well as in its relations. 34, page 239. A category of assertive rich peasants known as Nattars in Tamil Nadu and Gavundas in Karnataka emerged during this period. They played an important part in the assessment and collection of revenue, which suggests the process of their accommodation in the power structure. 35. The accentuation of social stratification during the period has also been shown by N. Karashima. 36. The segmentary state and the Rajput polity. Soudal's attempt to explain the Indian experience in terms of the segmentary state is as old as 1956, when he felt hesitant because of the lack of, quote, adequate documentation, unquote. 37. Still, he thought the polygar system of South India and the polity of the Marathas to be segmentary. 38. 30 years later, he considers the documentation produced by Burton Stein and Richard Fox to be sufficient, and hence declares the Chola and Rajput polities to be segmentary. But this documentation continues to be as inadequate as ever. Para. The idea of segmentary state, which provides for the rule of sons and relatives in the outposts of the kingdom, can be partly applied to a few Rajput states, particularly to the Chauhan kingdoms that existed in the 10th, 11th, and 13th centuries. The Chauhan king placed more reliance on the scions of the royal family and placed them in charge of marginal areas conquered by him, although some of the local rulers vanquished by the Chauhans were retained as tributaries and given various feudal titles such as Mahamandaleshwara. The practice which led to the posting of royal kinsmen as governors was bound to prove disastrous to the central authority. Kingship knows no kinship, and therefore in course of time these kinsmen would declare themselves independent and cut off all connections with the central authority. Adventurous members of the royal family, either fired by personal ambitions or frustrated by the law of primogeniture, left the main line of the family, 39, and instead of living on small fiefs, set themselves up as independent kings in such outlying areas as provided congenial material conditions for the creation of the state. In such a situation, they might maintain their contact with the original ruler in the family, but their authority would not be really legitimized, page 240, by the central king. On the other hand, all rulers were consecrated and legitimatized by the Brahmanas, who were not their kinsmen, but who had to be given grants of land for their maintenance. Dasharatha Sharma, who made a detailed study of the Chauhan dynasties, found the Chauhan political and military system to be feudal in character. 40. Even if we leave out the number of vassals who were conquered tributaries or feudatories, the number of those who were granted jagirs and thus lorded it over the peasants was considerable. The vassals, including the kinsmen and others, supplied a large number of troops to the central authority, which maintained a small number of soldiers. This feudal organization of the army, which was an extremely important organ of the state, is considered a weakness of the Chauhan kingdom, 41, which eventually succumbed to the Turkish invasions because of this. Para. Sometimes the idea of clan monarchies is advanced to explain the duo-decimal village organization of the Rajputs in groups of 12, 24, 36 villages etc. But the ministers and other high officers appointed by them did not belong to the same clan or caste, 42. On the other hand, some inscriptions make it clear that the clan egalitarianism was destroyed by the denigration of a large number of Gurjara clansmen to the position of ploughmen, 43. However, in critical situations, clan ideology may have been invoked to scotch internal disorders and disaffection, para. Most Brahmanized ruling families were given lunar and solar origins by the grateful Brahmanas. But in the case of non-Aryan, non-Brahmanized tribes, only those who acted as chiefs and priests in the clan/tribal setup were given higher status. Others were reduced to the position of Shudras. Even those who considered themselves as belonging to the original stock of the Rajputs went on changing their clan ideology. In medieval Marwar, the services of genealogists were utilized to give a higher status to the families of those who managed to rise in power at the cost of those whose ruling lines were older. Accordingly, Pidhiawalis, Pidhiawalis, or genealogies were modified to elevate those who managed to acquire power in competition with the older ruling families. As the power equation changed, the junior lineages, page 241, came to be mentioned earlier in the genealogies by the grateful bards, BARDs, Charanas, who were lavishly rewarded with villages, 44. Through genealogical ideology, members of the junior line tried to prove themselves older than the oldest ruling families. But this clan or lineage ideology could be a feature of any feudal or other types of state in which a part of the agricultural produce provided the main basis for the existence of the kingdom. Para. I do not know well enough about the relation of Rajput states with the Mughals. Southall points out that the Rajput polity should not be considered segmentary in the same sense as the Alur. This is so because the Rajput states were subordinate to the Mughal state, and this relationship was expressed not in terms of clan gradations, but in the idiom of power and authority. Similarly, the various successor states, including those of the Rajputs, which rose on the ruins of the Mughal power, were not ruled by the scions of the central royal family. This was not the case with the Nizam, Rohillas, and the Awadh Nawabs, not to speak of the Jats, Sikhs, and Marathas. Para. If the development of the early medieval Rajput polity is studied carefully, the all-pervasive grant system and the various dues assigned for the maintenance of a large number of officers leave little doubt that a strong land-owning class intervened between the peasants and the central authority. 45. Of course, there existed not just one central Rajput state with its core and periphery, but many states mainly with core areas. The polity in each core area could be better called feudal rather than segmentary, which links decentralization with differentiation between the ritual and the political authority. The type of polity that existed in early medieval times in the Rajput kingdoms of Rajasthan, particularly in those of the Chauhans, was firmly based on feudalism, inasmuch as land was granted to the members of the royal family for their maintenance. This point has been brought out elsewhere, 46, section North Indian state, segmentary or feudal, ? Southall accepts Stein's idea that the North Indian states were segmentary, page 70. Segmentary means that the heartland of a kingdom, page 242, was ruled by a dominant dynasty and its peripheries by the branches owning keen-based allegiance to the central ruling dynasty. The idea can apply particularly to the kingdoms of the Chauhans. It does not apply to any other North Indian states whose rulers were Rajputs, either descendants of the old Brahmanized clans or of the newly improvised chiefs of foreign or autochthonous AUTOCHTHONOUS tribes. That the North Indian kingdoms had their state system marked by a system of taxes, professional soldiery, bureaucracy, and the power to take the final decision in political matters can be easily inferred from the study of the political system in early medieval times. 47. In ancient times, we have this instrumental model of the state in many parts of the country. The Maurya state and to a large extent the Satavahana and the Kushana states corresponded to this model. But in early medieval times, taxes, army, and bureaucracy were not organized in the same manner as they were organized in ancient times. Two significant changes occurred. One, states were formed in those areas of the country which had not witnessed state systems in ancient times. Stimulus to state formation came from the neighboring states in varying degrees. Inscriptions speak of taxes, regular professional army, and fairly organized bureaucracy. Obviously, these new states in various parts of the country were based on the spurt in agrarian settlements and an increase in agricultural production in the country as a whole. 48. Even if a few branches of the main ruling family wanted to expand, they could not from states in a vacuum. Within bracket 2. Besides increase in the number of states in early medieval times, the character of the state system itself underwent a change. Because of an enormous increase in land grants, quote, the tax collecting area of the state contracted and the rent collecting area of the beneficiaries expanded, unquote, stop. A large number of landlords in the form of brahmanas, temples, and fief-holding military and administrative officials appeared in this period. The number of landed intermediaries was much larger in South India, and their presence was felt there more strongly. In northern India, the Brahmana beneficiaries did not have to pay any tax to the state for the grants that were made to them. In South India, they had to pay nominal taxes. 49. In any case, it is clear that although the areas settled by agriculturists increased immensely, page 243, the area of taxable land under the direct control of the king decreased considerably. Another significant change in the tax system was that in northern India, particularly in the Rajput states, many officials were not paid directly out of the state coffer, but granted certain specific taxes for their maintenance. 50. Similarly, we notice a change in the composition of the army. It appears that the number of soldiers directly maintained by the state in ancient times was much larger than the number of soldiers maintained by it in early medieval times. A medieval ruler could mobilize an army much larger than that of the Mauryas, who are considered to be the rulers of the whole country. This became possible because of increase in population and also because of the manner in which the army was mobilized. Significantly enough, Harsha's army outnumbered that of the Mauryas. The Mauryas are reported to have 6 lakh soldiers, but in the 7th century, Harshavardhana could mobilize an army of 2 million, though his empire was much smaller than that of the Mauryas. 51. Evidently, feudal vassals and various kinds of tributaries increased in number during early medieval times, and for the territory assigned to them or recognized as the area of their jurisdiction by the central ruler, they were bound to perform certain obligations as samantas or vassals. Military feudalism was an important phenomenon, and early medieval texts prescribe for a vassal the supply of a fixed quota of soldiers at the time of war to the paramount lord. Thus, it seems that the total number of regular soldiers of various types raised by the feudal vassals increased at the cost of regular professional soldiers maintained by the central king or by the paramount lord. Para. Further, the nature of the bureaucratic apparatus seems to have changed. The main responsibility of the state was to collect taxes, to maintain law and order, and occasionally to undertake certain public works so that the administration of the kingdom could be carried on smoothly. For all these services, the officials seem to have been paid earlier in cash, supplemented by land grants. But during early medieval times, it seems that even in what is known as the core area, they were remunerated through grants of land, page 244, grants of land revenues, or through grants of villages. This started the process of creating vested interest of the officers in the localities under their jurisdiction, leading to the erosion of the effective authority of the central government. Though on the strength of charters issued by the central authority they could collect taxes, on occasions of conflict between the interest of the central authority and that of officers operating in the local areas, the latter would naturally care more for themselves than for the central government. That is why in early medieval times we hear of several officers getting out of control of the central authority and setting up their own independent kingdoms. Para. Law-keeping and judicial authority constitute an indispensable attribute of the state power. The common people feel the presence of the state power only when they are brought to book for breach of law or are made to pay taxes. This power was exercised in ancient kingdoms by the judicial officers and constabulary appointed by the state. In India, the laws laid down in the Dharmashastras were enforced by the various grades of officers appointed by the state in the towns and the countryside. Of course, local disputes were settled by village elders, and the old clan or communal assemblies had changed in character during the medieval period, but these had not completely disappeared. Ancient texts provide for the administration of both civil and criminal law by either the officers appointed by the king or by the king himself. But in early medieval times, this important function of the state devolved largely on the beneficiaries to whom villages were granted. The Brahmana beneficiaries were allowed to punish 10 offenses committed by the people and also empowered to levy fines from the convicts. The domain granted to the Brahmana beneficiaries was exempted from the entry of regular or irregular soldiers and policemen of the state. The state had delegated in a large measure its judicial and law-keeping authority and functions to those Brahmanas who were given villages or plots of land. In some areas, law and order may have been maintained and local disputes settled collectively by superior Brahmana landholders who were organized into sabhas, as in the state of the Cholas. Page 245. But in North India, the beneficiaries mostly exercise these functions individually in their benefices. In certain areas, however, law and order was maintained by the elders and the Panchakulas, literally a body comprising heads of 5 hereditary families, which was just a euphemism for powerful local family heads from the dominant caste who exercised that authority, especially in parts of Rajasthan. These persons did not necessarily belong to the same clan or were related by bonds of kinship. Para. The segmentary concept presupposes a pyramidal organization in relation to the central state. 52. However, the process of sub-infeudation is not thought of, although in many early medieval kingdoms of India and Europe, the power pyramid is organized on the basis of land grants. Though Southall talks of the pyramidal social structure and the hierarchical power structure, 53, he does not think of a pyramidal economic structure. Social, economic, and political hierarchies can be identified in early medieval India. Land assignments created unequal categories of landed groups, comprising rent/surplus supported landlords and tax/rent-paying peasants. The former generally belong to the 2 higher varnas and the latter to the Shudra category. Thus, in terms of social grading, the landed categories corresponded to broad caste divisions in the social pyramid. However, the interlinks between social, economic, and political pyramids in early India need to be explored further. Para. Undoubtedly, the grant of substantial stretches of cultivated land by the state brought about a qualitative change in the economy and nature of the state. 54. This phenomenon, which did not have to do much with the factor of kinship or lineage, may best be described as feudal. Between AD 1000 and 1200, and especially in the 13th and the 14th centuries, we have clear evidence of the presence of fiefs, benefices, and sub-infeudation in major part of those areas which had been Brahmanized. Tirumalai enumerates as many as 5 grades in the landed hierarchy under the Cholas. The king was followed by the assignee, then came the occupant who could lease land to the sub-occupants who finally got it cultivated by the cultivating tenants. 55. The spread of such hierarchy might differ from area to area, and sometimes it may be even absent. Page 246. The presence of 2 basic classes, that is, a subject peasantry and a dominant landlord class, which makes for feudalism, 56, is attested by both early medieval inscriptions and literary texts. They speak of the great hierarchy of the feudal vassals and also refer to the grant of land revenue for military, political, and administrative services. The Nayaka system, under which land was assigned for military service, is considered, quote, a characteristic feature of the South Indian Hindu polity, unquote, stop, 57. Even those who contest the existence of the feudal system in India clearly concede the existence of a class of landlords. This, for example, is the view of the great epigraphist D.C. Sarkar, 58. It would therefore appear that the segmentary concept does not apply to the nature of the polity in North India during the early medieval period. On the contrary, if we look at it in terms of feudal traits, we get a far better understanding of the North Indian polity. The feudal system is considered by Southall compatible with the segmentary political system as in the 11th century France and elsewhere. 59. Apparently, he has in view the political aspect of feudalism marked by parcellization of power. But if the segmentary concept cannot explain the economic aspects of feudalism, Southall solves the problem by qualifying the feudal system as segmentary. In his view, quote, the model of the feudal mode of production is a segmentary system of lords and vassals, owning rent-producing landed estates that are also political jurisdictions linked in chains of superordination and subordination to one another, unquote, page 78. If this is so, what purpose is served by replacing the concept of the feudal state by that of the segmentary state? What the segmentary underlines is the parcellization of political power. But this feature of feudalism is well known to historians, who also associate with it economic and other traits not known to the segmentary concept. According to Southall, the segmentary concept could be applied to the, quote, kinship mode of production, to the Asiatic mode and also to the feudal mode, unquote, stop. How does our understanding improve if we apply a blanket label to social formations that differ from one another basically and can be identified specifically? Para. Bartenstein's views have some bearing on the current debate. He states that, quote, notwithstanding its distinguished paternity by D.D. Kosambi, page 247, in middle 1950s, and R. S. Sharma a decade later, the feudal concept has never been seriously tested against the claims inherent in it, nor has it been elaborated in any significant way, unquote, 60. Here, something is wrong with his chronology. My, quote, origins of feudalism in India, circa AD 400 to 650, unquote, appeared in 1958, 61, and, quote, not a decade, unquote, after Kosambi's work, quote, in middle of 1950s, unquote, stop. Incidentally, after 1956, when Kosambi's An Introduction to the Study of Indian History was published, he wrote two valuable papers on feudalism in 1959, 62. That, quote, the claims inherent, unquote, in the feudal concept have been both, quote, tested, unquote, and significantly, quote, elaborated, unquote, will be amply borne out by the papers including mine found in D. N. Jha, ed. Feudal Social Formation in Early India, 63. Since then, several other publications have discussed new dimensions of the subject. The application of the feudal model to the study of art, religion, caste system, language and literature of medieval times is proving rewarding. Yet, the concept of Indian feudalism is called a, quote, convenient residual position, unquote, stop. If it means an unaccountable position, it will continue to be so as long as the coiner of the phrase refuses to take account of the work done on the subject. How I wish a serious scholar does not shut his eyes to the literature on the subject during the last 3 decades or so. Mark of exclamation, para. Feudalism is denounced as an, quote, article of left historiographical faith, unquote, stop. But I wrote a long paper, 64, in response to the criticism of a scholar who is considered a leftist, 65. To attribute feudalism to leftism betrays an appalling ignorance of the work of reputed researchers such as Devangana Desai, Lalanji Gopal, N. Karashima, T.V. Mahalingam, Dashratha Sharma, and B.N.S. Yadava, 66, who by no means can be labeled as, quote, leftists, unquote, stop. They have applied the feudal analogy fully or partly to the Indian state, society and economy of different regions and periods. Harman Kulke shows a, quote, new pattern of Indian feudalism, unquote, under Harsha, 67, and speaks of, quote, military feudalism, unquote, 68, in pre-Mughal times. But despite all empirical work, the declamation of the feudal concept in the Indian context has become an obsession with those who cannot extricate themselves from the colonial constructs on Indian history presented in a new garb. The importance of kin, caste, religion, symbolism, segmentation, etc., page 248, is overemphasized, and any comparison with the West European experience to bring out historical specificities and universalities is frowned upon. Some Western historians and Indologists underline the role of decentralization in early Indian history and assert that Indian rulers were merely masters of roads, towns, and capitals and not of the hinterland. They would not consider the feudal framework for analysis, although it can explain the mechanisms through which rent was collected from the rural population and remitted as revenue by the feudal lords to the central treasury in early medieval times. Para. In Stein's view, Indian feudalism is seen by its exponents only in relation to feudatories found in pre-modern India, 69. But really, the landlords who emerge either on their own or through assignments and recognition given by the central authority are considered a crucial component by the protagonists of feudalism, and so are the peasants who are consequently made servile. The payment of tribute by the feudatories to the central power depends on its strength, which consequently determines the extent of local exploitation of the peasants. If the vassal has to pay regular tribute, the peasant would be taxed more. If he has to do it occasionally, the peasant would be taxed less. But the landlords superimposed upon the peasants become regular exploiters whose presence is indispensable to the control of the land and of the peasants who cultivate it. The feudal infrastructure explains the nature of the state and helps us to understand the nature of all the other superstructural elements such as art, religion, culture, etc. Next, Asiatic mode of production.